Well, Canadians can be a smug bunch. Often we tend to define ourselves by what we're not, namely Americans. As Donald Trump threatens long held democratic conventions in the great republic to the south of us, many of us tend to think the state of our own governance is relatively healthy and among the greatest democracies on earth. It is the ambition of my next guest to deprive us of this comfort. Here to talk about the crisis of Canadian democracy is Andrew Coyne. Welcome.
Good to be with you.
I understand that congratulations are in order. This is your first book.
That's true, yes.
Now, as you put it, the beginning of change is to shed our illusions. Before we can start to fix our democracy, we need to realize how broken it is. Well, just how broken is it?
Well, as you say, when we compare to what's going on in the States, where all sorts of democratic norms are being trampled over, and there's real threat of, autocracy, we certainly look good compared to them. And by, the standards of our elections free and fair, does anybody threatened or bribed at the polling place? No, of course not. We measure up very well. But I think that can blind us to how substantive is our democracy. Yes, we hold free and fair elections, but do those elections result in a parliament that actually represents us, that actually looks like the differences of opinion that actually exist in the country? Do the members of parliament that we elect have any real power to represent us in our ridings? Does parliament collectively have any real power to hold government to account in the way that it's supposed to? Does cabinet government, which we think of as the foundation of our system, is it a reality, or is it basically all power in the prime minister's office? When you get into these kinds of questions, which have been bugging us for years, it's been clear on a number of fronts that the system has not been working the way it should. But I think it's when you pull them all together and you sum it up, you kind of come away saying our democracy looks a lot more symbolic and ritualistic than actually real and substantive.
Now, the book was going to press just as Donald Trump was about to take his second oath of office, and as liberals were choosing their latest leader after Justin Trudeau prorogued Parliament. Is there anything that has happened since then that has changed any of your conclusions you make in the book?
Really not. I mean, it's if I can't think of a more telling statement about the depths to which Parliament is sunk than the fact that Parliament's been dark for nearly 6 months and nobody even noticed or cared in the middle of a national crisis when, the President of the United States, for goodness sakes, is threatening our independence and our sovereignty at a time when people were very worried. And you certainly saw that during the election campaign, at a time when people were really crying out for leadership and for our legislators to sort of meet and discuss and voice our fears and thrash through solutions. Parliament sat dark. And of course, why did we get into this fix? Because the Liberals were stuck with a leader they couldn't get rid of, because our system makes it virtually impossible for party leaders to be, let alone prime ministers, to be removed, which makes them basically completely accountable to nobody while they're there. He then prorogues the House and leaves the House dark for months, because apparently you can do that when you're afraid of losing a confidence vote. That's an abomination in our system of government, that you should be able to avoid a confidence vote that way. Instead of just going dark for a few days, they stay dark for 2 or 3 months while they hold a leadership race in the cockamamie way that we do, where it's, children and people who aren't even citizens are allowed to vote. We've just had a kind of an object lesson the last few months of a lot of the things that are wrong with our system of government, including, of course, the election that we just had, where we're supposedly never been more divided, and some hotheads in Alberta are threatening separation. When the Liberals got 30% of the vote in Alberta, that's the best they've done since 1968, but they only get 2 seats out of it. So our elections keep on presenting to us this false picture of the country. I mean, we've got real enough divisions as it is, don't get me wrong, but our system of government exaggerates and exacerbates that and makes us look much more divided than we are. So long and short of your question is no. We've just had more lessons in the many ways in which our elections and our parliamentary system are dysfunctional.
Now, in recent days, the Liberals voted against a provision that would have made it easier to recall their leader, to get rid of the prime minister. As I think you say in the book, it took them 2 years finally to get Justin Trudeau to move on. That same provision allowed the Conservatives to unseat Aaron O'Toole in just a matter of days. I think I know the answer, but do you think the Liberals will live to regret this decision?
I'm sure they will. I mean, it's an object lesson again in the sort of learned helplessness of MPs. To get the Reform Act, as it's called, to get it passed, this law which allows party caucuses, if they choose, to acquire various powers, one of which is to remove the leader. To get that passed was very difficult because all the party leaders told all their caucuses, don't vote for this. And he had to make, Michael Chong, the sponsor of the bill, had to make all sorts of concessions to do that. And one of the concessions was that it would only apply if caucuses voted to acquire these powers. And the main flaw in that was they didn't make it a secret ballot. So the Liberals get in there to consider it, and the word came out from the Carney office that, you're not supposed to vote for this, and so they didn't. And yeah, I think that shows how MPs have a hard time breaking out of the vice. This is one of the few instruments that could actually make leaders more accountable to their caucus. You best believe that Pierre Poilievre is looking over his shoulder now. I mean, he's got an argument he can make that he deserves to stay on because the Conservatives increased their vote, et cetera. But there's clearly a lot of unhappiness in the Conservative caucus, and he's on notice that he's got to pay more attention to them, be less bullying of them than he was when when everyone thought he was going to be the next prime minister. You're absolutely going to be able to see a difference in the relationship between the caucus and the leader, between the Conservatives and the Liberals.
Now, you bring up many examples of dysfunction in the book. We could rattle them all off, or we could just get to the heart of it, which I think is the increasing power of the Prime Minister's office. And I guess it's not a new thing. Would you say this is a gradual backsliding, or this has been something that's been there since Confederation?
Well, prime ministers have always been powerful, and they should be powerful to a large extent. I mean, that nobody's arguing we shouldn't have prime ministerial government, but there was a time when cabinets were a lot smaller than they are now, and where ministers were a lot larger. The odd thing is, the larger any organization gets, usually the wisdom is you need to delegate more. You can have a little nimble startup where the entrepreneur runs everything, but as soon as that company starts to become a bigger deal, a larger corporation, he starts to need to delegate authority. We've gone the opposite way. The bigger government has become, the more that we've centralized power in the hands of a few people, basically, in the prime minister's office, the prime minister and a few close advisors. And one manifestation of that is that the cabinet has become less and less a body for actually making decisions, and ministers have become less and less responsible for their departments and for shaping policy for the departments, and they more and more become simply spokespeople for the prime minister's office. They meet basically for the prime minister to bounce ideas off them, but not to really make decisions. And then they're given their marching orders is to go out and basically sell policies that they had no real hand in shaping themselves. Sometimes they will have ideas about policy, but they'll be rudely overruled. Even powerful prime ministers like a finance minister, like Chrystia Freeland, who'd been there for 9 years, found that the prime minister was announcing multi-billion-dollar spending programs that she'd never even heard of. That was part of what drove her to resign, along with the appalling treatment of being told she was fired, but she should stay on and fake it for a little while so they could make a smoother transition. I mean, it was all so redolent of what has happened to even what you would think of would be very powerful ministers. So yeah, it's really become centralized in the office of one man, one person, one office. And one of the costs of that is, cabinet is always supposed to have been a body that advises the prime minister, but they're also a bit of a check on the prime minister in a well-functioning system. In most parliamentary democracies, the prime minister has to think about, how do I balance off this wing of the party against that wing of the party as represented by these heavyweights in cabinet? How do I make sure that I don't veer too far in one direction because I might really annoy that minister so much that he or she might even resign? So he's got these kind of reality checks where he's got to take these people into his confidence. He's got to make them part of a team so that they feel like they're contributing. And so therefore, all the people that they represent, the regions or wings of the party or demographic groups or what have you, that they'll feel that they're part of the decision making as well. And that's really become less and less the case, and more cabinet has simply become a way in which you distribute prizes to people, meaningless prizes really, but prizes of, oh, look, you've got a cabinet seat, can't actually do anything with it, but you get to drive around in a car, you know.
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, I think the line is.
That's right. That's well put. Exactly.
With so much power concentrated in the hands of the prime minister and the PMO, are reforms even possible? I think you posed it in the book. Why would someone change something that helped them get into power in the first place? What's in it for them?
That is certainly one of the dilemmas. I mean, it's true of, I think, of any democratic reform agenda, but it's certainly true here that all of the things that one might do to try to distribute power down and away from the prime minister, in particular, and from the government to parliament, all these things require the people who actually hold the power now to be willing to surrender some of it, and that's very difficult to do. Um, I think there's only sort of two possible ways out of that. One is if you can just get the ball rolling, if you can, there's all these kind of vicious circles that we're caught in now where Parliament and members of Parliament are so irrelevant that nobody can imagine why they should be given any more power because, who the hell are they? But if you can start to reverse that, you can start to get a virtuous circle going. So if there's anything we can do that can increase the powers of MPs and therefore get MPs themselves, first of all, to start seeing themselves as more than simply step and fetchits for the leader, then they start to get ideas about, well, I deserve more power to fit my station. So the fact that we've got the ball rolling, as we talked earlier about giving at least members of one caucus the right to remove the leader, they don't have the right to choose a new one, which is a huge impediment because you remove the leader and you're just condemning your party to 8 months of drift while they choose a new one. So there's a real check on their willingness to use that, I think. But at least they have it in an extreme situation. They can remove the leader. Well, maybe that will lead other caucuses to start to have ideas. Not the Liberals weren't willing to do it this time, but maybe next time. And maybe if MPs start to acquire more of these powers, they'll start to demand more, and we can get the ball rolling. So that's one way you can start slowly, gradually, to bring the thing back to something resembling parliamentary democracy. The other way, and I certainly don't wish this, is we just get ourselves into such a crisis that all things become possible because we've got nothing to lose. And my worry is, in this situation we now find ourselves in, where everyone agrees we've got a lot of big decisions and big changes we're going to have to make because of what's been forced upon us by Donald Trump. When your nearest ally, best friend, neighbor, a defender, and trading partner suddenly turns into your adversary, you have to rethink a lot of things. And we're talking about rethinking defense and trade policy and the economy and internal trade and all these really big matters that we've kind of avoided and drifted along avoiding for the last several decades. Well, if we have to make those decisions in a hurry with the system that we have now, where power is so concentrated, where quote unquote majority governments are elected with less than 40% of the vote, most of it from one part of the country, because that's another thing that our electoral system does, is it creates these kind of regional ghettos where parties are very strong in one part of the country and very weak in the other, and have been for decades. And that party gets elected and decides it's going to make all these big changes in a hurry in ways that might be repugnant to another part of the country. I think there's a real potential for division and crisis and gridlock and God knows what else. And the only upside I can see in that is maybe in the middle of that, things get to such a pass that we look around and we say to ourselves, okay, we have to fix the way we make decisions in this country. We don't seem to be able to make tough decisions without breaking the country apart. I don't wish that, as I say, on anybody, but the only rosy part of that I'll say is that's what happened at Confederation. The old province of Canada, the quote unquote united province of Canada, where they were at each other's throats the whole time and was completely gridlocked. And eventually they got so stuck that unimaginable alliances, people who had been sworn enemies, John A. Macdonald and George Brown, were able to form a grand coalition and make these unheard of changes that resulted in the Federation in the beginning of Canada. Sometimes out of crises comes great possibilities.
So you're hopeful.
That maybe putting too strong of a word on it, but what I'm just trying to do with this book is just get people to wrap their minds around the problem. We live in Canada. We're a very prosperous, successful country in so many ways that it can make us complacent. It can make us not see difficulties that are confronting us. When we do look at our democratic problems, most days of the year we'll grind our teeth and grumble and say it's terrible and nobody represents me. But then as soon as somebody proposes making any changes, we suddenly become very protective of the status quo. Or we'll shrug and we'll say to ourselves, oh, look, it's always been this bad, or things are tough in all countries. So what I've tried to do in this book is say, look, this is really how bad it is. It covers every aspect of our institutions of democracy. It's worse than it was before in ways that I spell out in the book. It's worse than it is in other countries. There are good studies and measures on this. We have a genuine problem, and we have to stop averting our eyes from it and shrugging or saying, "Why are you questioning Canada?" and realize that we need to fix this. There are real world consequences to this. This isn't just about textbooks and academic ideas. This is about how we govern ourselves on a day-to-day basis. We're being materially impeded and thwarted, and finding ourselves unable to govern ourselves in ways that we would like to do because of these institution failings. And at some point, you have to roll up your sleeves and fix these things. And I will say, if you want a bit of optimism, that is something you can say about this country is, yeah, we can be complacent. Yeah, we can let things drift for a while. But when we really do get our backs to the wall, take, for example, the deficit problem in the 80s and 90s, when we're really in a fix, and when we finally figure that out, we're pretty good at spitting in our hands and rolling up our sleeves and getting it done. And so not every country can claim that. So there is something in our political culture. And that's the other thing I'll say, if we want some more positive things. Coming back to comparing ourselves to the States, we do still have a reasonably healthy political culture in this country. We don't regard each other as enemies. We don't complain that elections are fixed. We don't get in and try and wreak vengeance on our opponents. And that's a precious thing, and we want to hold on to that. But I think institutional reform will help in that regard, in warding off some of these very negative, toxic tendencies that are kind of afoot in every Western democracy these days. I think it will help fortify us against descending into that kind of division and negativeness.
So to sum up then, the book, in your words, pulls together all the separate strands of dysfunction in Canada's government into one unholy mess. What do you hope the reader gets out of the book then?
Just an understanding of the reality of our situation. You can be a patriotic Canadian. I'm as patriotic as they come, but true patriots, are willing to look clearly at things and understand that it's better to get changes done before they become a massive crisis. I mean, we're on the verge of a crisis, or we're in an apprehended crisis now, in my view. But if we act before things really descend into madness, then we'll be much better off.
The name of the book is The Crisis of Canadian Democracy. It's published by Sutherland House. My thanks to author Andrew Coyne.
My pleasure. Thank you.